Friends, I believe you have already revised the provisions of section 31 we covered in the earlier video. Subsection 1, subsection 4, subsection 7 in relation to goods, and subsection 2, 5 and 6, those are in relation to services. In this video, I am covering up subsection 3, that is for specific situations and specific cases, right? So here we come to subsection 3. There are multiple clauses in this, right? Clause A. When this clause becomes applicable, this is only for a registered person who applied for registration within prescribed time. So this clause becomes applicable only if application for registration is made within the prescribed time, and the prescribed time is 30 days. So this is 30 days. So 30 days since when? Since he becomes liable to be registered. So this clause A is relevant only for a person who is now registered, but before that, after becoming liable for registration, he made an application within 30 days. In this case, if he makes application within 30 days, registration is valid since the date he is liable to be registered. Friend, these are the provisions which are under section 22, 23, 24. Okay, so registration is valid since the date he is liable to be registered, and if it does not apply within 30 days, then registration is effective from the day registration certificate is issued to him. So that there is a major difference of the validity of registration when the registration becomes effective. If application is made within 30 days since becoming liable, registration is effective from the date he becomes liable. Certificate is of course issued later. So assume that somebody becomes liable to be registered, say on 15th of July 17. Sorry, 15th of July was too early. Let me change the date. 15/11/17, the person becomes liable to be registered. He makes an application on 25th/11/17 and he is granted the registration certificate on 30th/11/17. So certificate he is having on 30th/11, but it is effective from 15/11. So when he has become liable from 15/11, so he has to pay tax for all the supplies he has made from 15/11 onwards. Registration certificate is available from 30th November, right? Without registration certificate, he cannot issue a tax invoice because tax invoice provisions are applicable to the registered people. In the section 31 we talked about in the beginning, right? So during this period between 15th November till 30th November, he is not issuing the tax invoice, he is issuing a bill of supply, right? Now what the clause A says, that if the person has applied within the specified time, after receiving the certificate within 1 month, he can issue a revised invoice, revised tax invoice for the supplies made since he became liable till he obtained the registration certificate, right? So clause A, that is important to understand when this is applicable. So this does not apply in all registration. This applies only if the application for registration is made within the prescribed time limit. So effectively what we need to write here is, this is regarding issue of revised invoice. So this is a revised invoice. Now this will be called as a tax invoice for the supplies made, for the supplies made since becoming liable till he obtains registration certificate. So during this period, whatever invoices he has issued earlier, those are not the tax invoices. Tax invoices will be issued now, right? So for that period, since he is liable to pay, he will issue revised invoice so that the recipient can avail input tax credit if he is eligible. Now what happens if the person did not apply within 30 days? Now this is a trick. His registration is effective from the date of grant of certificate, but he is liable to pay tax for all the supplies he has made since he became liable, right? Now for that period he did not apply for registration, he will have to pay the tax, but his customer will not get the input tax credit because he cannot issue revised tax invoice. That's a problem. So it is better that application for registration is made at the earliest possible after the person becomes liable to pay. Okay, so this is clause A. Now moving to clause B, this is something interesting to understand. This is talking about value of supply being less than rupees 200. So it is a question of the value of supply for which invoice is required. It is below 200, means up to rupees 199.99. In that case, separate invoice need not be issued, right? So this I can bifurcate. Below rupees 200, and this is rupees 200 and more, right? If the value of supply is below 200, separate invoice is not required. But in this case also, separate invoice becomes necessary in two situations. Number one, customer wants. Number two, the recipient is a registered supplier. He himself is a registered person, so he may avail credit even for that small amount as well, right? So there are two situations where registration will be needed. So here we can add separate invoice is not required except when number one, customer needs it. Number two, recipient is registered. So in general, where the value of supplies is below 200, separate invoice is not required except in these two cases, where the customer wants or where recipient is registered. So otherwise, when the separate invoice is not needed, what is to be done? Issue a single invoice for all such supplies made during the day at the end of the day, right? So for all the supplies, so even if there are 25 supplies of this kind in a day, issue one single consolidated invoice at the end of the day. So this we can add that one consolidated invoice at the end of day. This will suffice, this will serve the purpose. And where the value of supplies is 200 or more, always a separate tax invoice is needed. Keep in mind that for issuing a tax invoice, the person has to be registered only. Unregistered person cannot issue tax invoice. He can issue any other document, right? So this is clause B. Now coming to clause C. Clause C relates to the person who is involved in making exempted supplies, as well as the person who is under the composition scheme. They are required to issue bill of supplies rather than tax invoice. Because tax invoice can be issued only where the tax is collected separately from the person, from the recipient, from the customer. In case of composition scheme, no tax is allowed to be collected from the recipient. So therefore, only bill of supplies is to be issued. And there also the concept of 200, below 200 rupees is equally applicable. So clause C. This is for exempted supplies as well as for supplies under composition scheme. So two situations are there. In this case, only a bill of supply. It is not a tax invoice, so that I am writing in red, not a tax invoice. And in that case also, if a value of supply is less than rupees 200, separate bill is not required. So this is clause C. So clause A that says a person who has applied for registration within 30 days. Clause B is generally for all the registered people. Clause C is for exempted supply as well as the person who is under the composition scheme. Now clause D comes in respect of advance payments. Clause number D. This is about advance voucher, and this is for advance payment which is received, right? So in the later part, when we talk about section 12 and section 13, then it becomes relevant for us. It is the time of issue of invoice or time of receiving the payment. There it becomes relevant. So there we are talking about that in section 31 subsection 3 clause number D, that whenever any supplier, registered supplier, happens to receive any advance in connection with a proposed supply, he is required to issue an advance voucher. Invoice cannot be issued because the supply is not there, right? And directly, even if he is issuing invoice, that is good enough, but otherwise the advance voucher is needed. Clause E is connected to this itself. This is talking about two things, that is a refund voucher. Refund voucher is directly connected to advance voucher. This is a situation where no supply is made, or where no tax invoice is there. So the supplies are not made for which the advance has been received here, for which the advance voucher has been issued, amount is refunded, then there has to be a refund voucher, right? Because this is required to be reflected in the periodical returns. This is also required to be reflected in the periodical returns. This should have a serial number, and in case of refund voucher, it should have a reference of the serial number of the advance voucher. Then only liability gets reduced, otherwise it will not be. Right. So the contra entries are there, but the correlation should be established. Therefore, the refund voucher is required to have reference of advance voucher, and reference can be given if only it is having a proper serial number. Right. So these are two documents which are related to advance voucher and in relation to refund voucher. Now the next two clauses, that is F and G, those are in relation to RCM. In case of RCM, two things are required. One is tax invoice, another is payment to supplier. This is clause F, this is clause G. Clause F says that whenever any supply is received in which RCM is applicable, so whether that is under section 9.3 or that is section 9.4, irrespective of that, tax invoice is required to be issued. To be issued for all supplies received by a registered person under section 9.3 or 9.4. Now this is regarding the tax invoice, but when he makes a payment to the supplier for which he is liable here, he is required to issue a payment voucher. So payment voucher at the time of making payment to supplier, but this is only if RCM is applicable, otherwise this is not relevant a clause. Okay, so friends, this is subsection 3 entirely. There are total 7 clauses, and all the clauses we have already covered. In clause A, we said a person making application within 30 days after the becoming liable, in that case he can issue a revised invoice. Clause B, that is talking about the issue of invoice generally. Clause number C, which is in case of exempt supplies as well as composition. Clause number D is advance payment. Clause number E is refund voucher. Clause number F, that is RCM. Clause number G, that is also RCM. So this completes our section 31. Right? In the next video, we'll talk about section 12, that is time of supply in relation to goods.